Hey guys, sorry for the long delay. Give me one sec. Hey guys, sorry for the long delay from my previous video. I'm getting off from being sick and I work full time. So finding time to do these videos as well as trying to take care of myself is kind of hard to do sometimes. All right. Well, on to the video. Hey there, and Hero here. I was like, I wanted to make a 10-year-old computer. Unfortunately, I only had parts on hand to make an 11-year-old computer. So I guess that's good enough, if not better, for a long-term test. I also want to use parts considered budget-friendly around that time, so I dug out that old FX 4300 and recently obtained a GTX 650 Ti with boost. So I knew what I wanted to do. To lessen the pain, I used an SSD for a boot drive, a simple 120 gig SSD from Saichi, or Saichi, whatever you want to say. It's just a Chinese branded GPU, and there goes my mic. Oh my god, I fucked up. To lessen the pain, I used an SSD for a boot drive, a simple 120 gig SSD from Saichi. It's an Eastern brand with a cool design, and well, it's doing its job for now, as well as 16 gigs of RAM. The 4300 is a 4-core CPU once again. I don't really have to explain why it's debate on it fully, though it generally has okay single-thread performance compared to the rest of the FX lineup from AMD. On to the basics. Launched October 2012 for AMD's AM3 Plus socket, the stock was 3.8 GHz and it can boost up to 4 GHz. Like most AMD CPUs, this was also unlocked, so you could overclock it quite well. Even for the entry level, this CPU has a 95-watt TDP, so it's indeed what you call a hot boy. However, if you're not overclocking, I've had okay luck with the stock cooler. Speaking of stock cooler, I was initially using one of the stock coolers you could typically get from the FX 8320 CPUs, but got loud. So I got a cheap $10 cooler from PC Cooler, and well, at least their name isn't misleading. Anyway, it did decently well as not sound like the PC was taking off. Now let's talk about the 650 Ti with boost. Just ignore that the boost version came out a few months later than the regular 650 and 650 Ti, putting its release in 2013. Close enough. The main difference is that it has 1 more gig of VRAM, putting at a whopping 2 GB of GDDR5. For basic specs, its base clock is 980 MHz with a boost of 1032 MHz with a clock of 1502 MHz. The TDP of this bad boy is 134 watts and has a 1x6 pin power connector, and Nvidia recommends a 300 watt PSU. This GPU is like an older Kepler version of the GTX 750 Ti. Though I like EVGA's design for this card, it gives off a brushed metal aesthetic. It's especially clean with its blower style cooler. They might not be the best coolers, but they look good, for especially how old this card is. Surprisingly, this card does support DX12, but only at the 11.0, so it can only go so far. Like always, we'll do the synthetics real fast. For Cinebench, we have the multi-score with 1587 with a single score of 415. So, this is a great start, failing some of the synthetics. Normally this doesn't happen, but damn, I really tried a couple times and 3DMark would just crash. Moving on, PCMark 2526. If you really wanted to know. So, I'll be playing some games throughout the years, and for this video I'll be trying to refrain from esports and live service games, so that is representative of the game's performance for that year. I might make a follow-up video of just esports titles. Anyway, let's get started. Borderlands 2 was perfectly playable and was smooth to play, which shows this PC could play games from this year or older titles perfectly fine. I can't remember if Saints Row 4 was considered a AAA title at the time, but at high preset it was in the 40 to 50 range. A good amount of time. And I believe in 2013 people didn't worry about 60 FPS for everything just quite yet, let alone the 1080p resolution. For a 2014 title, I chose Dark Souls 2, and I spent a lot of time in this game around this time. It brought back so many memories. Anyway, the experience was smooth and much better than when I originally played it, which was on a non-gaming gateway laptop. Pretty smooth, hitting the game's 60 FPS cap majority of the time, except for maybe one or two stutters overall. So, moving on to 2015, I chose GTA 5, since the PC port was released a few years later than the console version. Now, whatever strange reason, because I have no clue, the game just didn't really want to go into 1080p, but 900p for a PC from this time is quite normal, and it did really well. Probably with a few tweaks here and there, I probably could have made a perfect 60 for the average, but it was hitting often enough, so close enough. A little later, the resolution issue was caused by the Nvidia control panel messing up. Even at low, Doom 2016 performed well, considering what is running this PC. Of course, we're starting to see how much of a sacrifice we're starting to make as the years go on. A good amount of PC gamers upgrade around the 5-year mark, so it will probably be interesting how this performs here on out. So here we are, starting to see where a system like this starts to really needs to make some compromise with the graphic settings. Even at low 1080p and 900p we're below 30 FPS and wasn't a very smooth experience overall. So I had to bump the game all the way down to 720p at the lowest preset to have a decent experience. So Devil May Cry 5, all things considered, is pretty well optimized. Still, it doesn't save the game from occasional slowdowns, especially during the cutscenes, though it still manages to play well for the most part without a problem. So, initially I was testing this on the 2.0 patch, but no matter what I did, the game had lighting issues where nothing could be seen except maybe for a reflection here and there. So I was about to put this down as a fail, but when I noticed that it was updating to a 2.1 patch, so I said why not, and for whatever reason, with upscaling or dynamic resolution, it didn't work. But at native resolutions, I can at least get something visible. And with that said, I set it to the lowest resolution I could and went from there. The results aren't surprising, but I'm impressed with how the game runs. The fact that it runs. I initially had Forza Horizon 5 in the 2021 slot, but when it came down to it, it wouldn't launch. It started to show the limitation of how far, compatibility-wise, a PC this old can go. Now for Tales of Arise, for the most part it ran in the 30s and will have most of its stutters during its transitions into battles and other areas. You will also notice lower frame rates in heavily populated areas, which there aren't too many of, but when you get to one, you'll be there for a bit since this is a very story-driven game. Despite being a 2022 title, Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak is well optimized and can run on a lot of low-end hardware, probably because it started life as a Nintendo Switch title. Despite not looking too pretty, it runs very well. So, here in 2023, I gotta say at this point for new games, it's not worth it. I first tried to do Armored Core 6, but I didn't want to run, and then I tried Resident Evil 4, and once again, it didn't launch. Both games kept crashing on startup, so I went with the next new 2023 title I owned, and Street Fighter 6. So with the lowest preset at 720p, it did decently well. A little blurry but adequate for you not to fall too far behind competitively. And if you want a closer to 60 FPS average, just put it on training stage for your online matches and you'll be perfectly fine. All depends on your internet. So what did we learn? A PC can only go so far, but you can't completely count it out. Once again, the magic of PC gaming is the ability to mess with settings. It surprised me that it managed what it did. It did help that the boot drive is an SSD and I had 16 gigs of RAM, but those are small upgrades you can do over the years. I had all the games on HDD and they did okay. The CPU was already obsolete from the start, but it did the job as many FX owners would say, myself included. It has a decent single thread performance, but with just 4 cores, even if they are real or not, the further along in time you go, the focus on multi-core has become very important. The GPU on the other hand is from the very old Kepler architecture, which has lost driver support back in 2021. Also as only having 2 gigs of VRAM, which I personally don't have a problem with, but does mean you always have to keep your texture, shadows, and more to low settings, as well as lowering resolutions to get decent frame rates. It's nice that it has some DX12 support, but it's very limited, so newer and newer games will simply just not work. This PC is really suited to older games or recent indie games. I'll probably check out its esports performance in another video. So, have you ever had these parts before? Let me know down below. I'm Hero, something of a virtual YouTuber myself. Like if you like, and dislike if you didn't like it, or just hate me. Subscribe for more, or if you're just masochistic, see you next time. Bye bye.
I put the new 4Gs on the G. I trap until the bloody bottoms is underneath, cause all my homies got it out the street. I keep 100 racks inside my jeans. I remember hitting the mall with my whole team. Now a homie can't answer calls cause I'm ballin'. I was waking up getting racks in the morning. I was broke, now I'm rich, I got 'em salty. All this designer on my body got me drip drip. Straight up out the country for 1/5. If I got a Bud Light, I'm a sip. Run up these racks.